Guys, how's the form? Thanks so much for joining us here. Episode 2 of the Ditches podcast in collaboration with Red Wolf Media. I'm joined here by the two other senior hurlers, Roman Shorthall on my right, Paulie Doyle on my left. Thanks so much for joining us here. Paulie, say something nice about Leo Varadkar.
He was a decent man. He did 20 years of public service, and I just feel like now is not the time to criticise him. I think if you've nothing good to say, you should wait until enough time. Let him have his moment, and then let your criticisms come out. There'll be time enough for that.
Roman, something nice?
Yeah, I'd agree with Paulie. I don't think we should even be discussing him today. We should let him have his moment. And I think it would be rude to talk about him.
Well, stay with us, guys. We're going to have a wonderful cavalcade of guests, including CEO of Vulcan Consulting, Lucinda Creighton, who's going to talk to us about how we need more honesty and transparency in politics. She's going to be joining us later on. To let you in on a little trade secret, this podcast isn't live. We've just got news about Leo Varadkar's resignation as both Taoiseach and leader of Fine Gael. We're waiting to hear who's going to be the next leader of the party and of the country. Looks like it's going to be decided by the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party, which should be good crack, if nothing else. To start off, an honest question, go to you first, Roman. What does Leo Varadkar believe in? What's his ideology?
Well, I think the answer can be found in, our fucking housing crisis, our health service, record homelessness. I think that kind of answers everything that you need to know about his politics or his ideology. It just can all kind of be summarised by the state that the country is in, and the state that as I said, the health services and housing is in.
How much of the responsibility for that is on Varadkar?
Well, I mean, government has a collective responsibility, but he is the leader. He's been in power now for I think nearly 7 years, so I would say a lot.
And what do you think he believes in?
I think his actual opinions kind of slip through for all of the spin doctors that he's employed, for all of the kind of PR people he has on staff. He's quite, as a political correspondent might say, gaffe prone, right? There was what he said in the run up to the referendum about the state not having a duty of care to people. There were previous comments he made during the COVID pandemic about how he'd heard stories about how people were scrounging off the COVID benefits. There was the infamous remark...
Welfare cheats do cheat us all.
They do, we'll get to that later. There was the infamous remark about how Tiny Tim should get a job.
Yeah. So, a banger.
I think that's what he believes in, really, that the state doesn't really have a duty of care for people, that, people who are rich deserve the money that's theirs and they should have to pay a minimal amount of tax, and people who are poor can go fuck themselves, more or less.
But I mean, he has had, he's had 20 years of a career in public life. Very actually, I mean, one thing that I kind of like to kind of think about and kind of ponder on is who are his people, who are his constituency. I mean, he's been extremely unsuccessful electorally since becoming leader of Fine Gael. Last general election, and I know that there was that popular hashtag not my Taoiseach, which drove people fucking mad. People who studied politics at DCU, basically, that kind of person. Also, one thing that's routinely held against him is that he was elected on the 5th count over in Dublin West. Do you know where those images of him at the count centre?
Yeah.
With Matt beside him just kind of going, oh, is it going to be this one? Is it going to be this one? And again, it's routinely held against him. Also drives people crazy about how, like, do these people not know that we live that we live in a country that has proportional representation by a single transferable vote? I learned this in my CSPE class. When, like, of course, it does say something about, and that, a sitting Taoiseach had to wait until the fifth count. He was that unpopular in what is, relatively, certainly by national standards, a relatively, like, it's an affluent constituency. It's kind of mixed, maybe.
Yeah, parts of it would be.
And there had been, obviously it's not going to come to pass now. I'm also kind of like reluctant to, I kind of feel, I don't want to go too far down the road of the mainstream poll core here and just talk about the soap opera of all this bullshit. But, like, there had been talk of him moving constituency and running in Dublin Bay South, which is, the archetypal Fine Gael constituency, But to bring it back down to, who do you think are the people who kept Varadkar in situ for both as leader of Fine Gael and the country, as well as his succession of ministerial posts? Like, to whom did he owe his whatever level of electoral success he did have?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, it's one thing to be elected as a TD, and as you said, like, we have this system of PR, and it's not first past the post. So, I mean, in terms of, like, getting elected, you just have to get enough people to vote for you in one constituency. But I've always been kind of surprised that, that he's lasted this long as leader of Fine Gael. I mean, I think, like, Fine Gael is different to where Fianna Fáil is at the moment, which is kind of like there's nobody there that you could kind of pick out and say, yeah, this person could replace Micheál Martin and be leader of the party. I mean, I think a lot of people would kind of share that view, Whereas with Fine Gael, like, I mean, there are people there that, and, like, this is what's going to happen now in a couple of weeks, there are people there that could, that want and could lead the party. People, like Simon Harris and Pascal Donoghue. But that's why I just could never understand, like, given, all these, as Paulie said, gaffes and everything, and just, I would say, like, unpopularity, like, with a lot of people, that, nobody ever kind of challenged him for the leadership. But, I mean, maybe that suggests, like, that, he was good at that part of the job, of kind of keeping everyone in control,
He was propped up by the media as well, and allies of his in the media. There's that famous interview with Brendan O'Connor where he's like, he's above politics. Somehow he's become a completely apolitical Taoiseach. Yeah. He said that on an interview with, was it Saturday Night, Tonight, or whatever the show on RTE was. It might have been I think it was the Late actually.
Brendan O'Connor said he's above politics.
He said he was above politics and apolitical. And that's how entrenched, like, the opinions of Fine Gael are in people who comment in newspapers. They're just seen as apolitical common sense. Like, what Varadkar says and does is just common sense. It's not political at all.
What would you say are the politics? What would you say, and what would Brendan O'Connor say are the politics behind Leo Varadkar saying something like, this was a couple of years or so ago, there was housing was being debated in the Dáil, as it frequently is, and the topic of landlords came up, and Leo Varadkar says he's one of these. I think there are two kind of, when you talk about things that Leo Varadkar said, and we do want to talk about what he actually did as well, but the things that he said, I think that there are going to be, the lines that he's going to be most remembered for are lines that he's kind of hated for.
Yeah.
That particular line of, well, it's important when we talk about landlords that we have to remember that one person's rent is another person's income. It could be their pension, it could be paying their mortgage. What would you say are the politics behind a statement like that, and what would Brendan O'Connor? Does Brendan O'Connor just say that that's apolitical?
Well, I mean, they don't want, or they're terrified that if people who vote Fine Gael go into negative equity, that they'll no longer vote Fine Gael, so they have to kind of pay lip service to trying to solve the housing crisis by saying that they're doing all of these things and they're enacting all of these measures, but actually it's about making house prices stable or increase, and also increasing rents for the class that Fine Gael serve.
And he's a landlord himself, which is like, I'm always like, when we talk about TDs, ministers, and above in Leo Varadkar's case, being a landlord, it's not necessarily for me about, this is a specific thing about Leo Varadkar which will make him act specifically biased in specific instances, but more an indication of where his class interests lie. Equally with Varadkar, I mean, you're talking about how they have to pay lip service about solving the housing crisis, but equally, one of his other greatest hits, of course, was he was giving a webinar with institutional property investors, among them what are known in the trade as cuckoo funds and vulture funds, where Varadkar's message to them was, Ireland is open for business, stick with us, please. Prostrating himself in front of actually institutional capital like that.
And the lip service in that instance would be then putting in a 10% stamp duty, saying, we're trying to tackle this, we're doing something about it, and then all of the funds just go, that's fine, we'll pay that because we still get 300 houses that we can rent out then, And
I mean, one that I always go on about, it's a continuation of his predecessor's legacy, Enda Kenny, who, in post-crash Ireland, you had a man, Stephen Schwarzman, who is CEO of Blackstone, one of the biggest, most influential, most ruthless institutional landlords in the world. Stephen Schwarzman, a guy who, the quote most famously attributed to him is, you have to wait until there's blood in the street, and that's when you buy up property. And this is what he did across the world, in the US and Europe, to the point where 4 or 5 years ago, the UN Special Rapporteur for Housing, one of her colleagues, they sent letters to governments across Europe using Blackstone as a case study, where they said, you need to stop allowing these, funds like these come in, hoover up properties, drive the price of rent up, drive the price of property up, absolutely exacerbating the housing crises in your respective countries, right? And they wrote to, governments across Europe, and the Irish government was one of them. Gazzy is like Enda Kenny, who was Taoiseach while Stephen Schwarzman was hoovering up property in Ireland. Enda Kenny was like playing golf with them, and kind of going come on in and buy up whatever you want, And that's certainly Varadkar. Yeah, I mean, I suppose he has to. It's an interesting one as well, where support for Fine Gael by all accounts has bottomed out among people our age and older, actually. 18 to 34 pluses in your case, Roman. They've had that kind of balancing act to play, where these people's parents certainly want their property prices to go up, whereas their kids, who are probably still living with them, obviously don't. So it's been the kind of delicate kind of balancing act for Varadkar, certainly rhetorically at least, to give the illusion of doing something while...
Yeah, I remember, I was just thinking that there was, during the by-election in Dublin Bay South, a good example of that was when, if you remember, I think it was RTE, they were just going around asking people what kind of issues they had and stuff like that, and there was a very well-to-do woman somewhere in Ranelagh, and they knocked on her door, and she said, my 3 sons can't afford to buy in Ranelagh. So yeah, it was yeah. So it was basically, that's the problem, when you rely on people like that for your votes, but then it's a catch-22 because then, their kids can't afford to buy a house. So how do you keep all those people happy? And I think
by running James Keogan in the by-elections.
Like 68% of people, that RT article the other day said between the ages of 18 and 24 are living with their parents, and that's like when it's all when the rental market is being subsidised by HAP, and I don't think it's included, say, people with disabilities who can't get housing and that kind of thing. There's certain groups, certain cohorts that were excluded from that statistic. It's unbelievable, and it's amazing how what constitutes a young person, say over the past 10 years, has gradually increased. It's going to get to the point as the housing crisis gets more and more acute, and we are all essentially serfs to giant vulture funds, giving them half of our income. We'll be told that young people, anybody under 60, is
actually, obviously there is this, exodus of TDs from Fine Gael, guys who I think it's up to 11 now. Sitting TDs who've said, nah, not for me anymore. People like, off the top of my head, Brendan Griffin down in Kerry, John Paul Phelan in Kilkenny, isn't he, I think? The most recent one is Kieran Cannon in Galway. And it had been put to Varadkar over the past couple of days about, look, what the fuck are Fine Gael going to do here? And the example he gave was, we've still got talent in the party. Look, James Keogan is one of them. Like James Keogan, who ran in the by-election, he was ultimately defeated by Ivana Bacik a couple of years back. But he's an interesting case study as well, where, and we did we do a story on this actually about his? We did a story about where he lives, which. He had gone around telling people effectively that he lived in Ranelagh when he didn't. He lived in Clonskeagh. He did
a podcast or some sort of live Zoom or something with people under like a sign in the background that was the Ranelagh Lewis stop.
I don't have
like it was like it was very much like Ranelagh was like being. I think one of his key policies was being from Ranelagh.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that was it.
Like. Famous election literature where he was like standing outside of the Spar in Ranelagh village, and there was just like a homeless person in the background. And they just put it on social media, and it's just they hadn't even noticed.
I mean, look, speculate if you want, or he's got a house in Clonskeagh, which is. What would we call it? Conservatively, in and around the $500,000 mark. And then
I think it was more than that.
Yeah,
it's a nice area.
But then he also just happens to have as parents Keogan J, and comes from a long line of generational wealth. So people like that, certainly of his age. Yeah, you also had people when this was brought up. You had. A lot of fucking Egypts basically going like, well, where do you expect a barrister to live? Guys who had kind of no understanding really of the industry and the time it takes to kind of build up something of a profile for yourself, which we're speculating here.
Yeah, you'd be amazed how many barristers aren't even registered for VAT. Because they don't meet the threshold, but it was just presumed that he's a barrister, he must be earning millions,
On barristers and Fine Gael, the other saintly profession for people like that are doctors. It's a bugbear of mine. This reflexive sort of beatification of doctors, or aren't you great kind of thing, aren't you you're saving people, etc., etc. Varadkar, of course, a doctor. What do you think about his time as healthcare minister?
Wasn't great, was it?
It's interesting.
Although I don't think anyone's time as health minister has been great, though, has it? Ever.
No, but talk about the ideology.
Mary Harney said in 2006 that A&Es across the country were in crisis because 495 people were on trolleys. We have exceeded that figure on a weekly basis, including, I think, last week since then. So by the government, by the politicians' own metric, the health service has been in crisis for coming on 20 years now. Leo Varadkar had a tenure in health minister, and things just continued to further deteriorate. For me, the enduring memory of his impact on health is actually to do with the COVID response. And how
the Mean Girls quote. This is like,
not all heroes wear capes.
There is no limit.
No, it was how the government had in one ear they had medical experts and people who were qualified to comment on what a public health response should be, and on the other they had restaurateurs and publicans, and they were trying to meet them in the middle. So you had the absurd situation where it was apparently safe to go and eat in a restaurant if you ordered a meal that cost like €10 or €15 or something like that. So I mean, look, no one wants to be health minister because it's the health service is in such a bad way. It's a black hole. They continue to throw money at it, and it just continues to deteriorate. And he's had a hand in that.
Well, he also, I mean, to kind of move a little bit forward, Village magazine story on him leaking a document to his friend Matthew O'Toole, a GP. One of the follow-up stories to that came from Jack Horgan-Jones in the Irish Times, who Jack went and did a Freedom of Information request, and he managed to get, it's rare that you get these in FOI requests, but he managed to get text messages. They were WhatsApp messages between Varadkar and Matthew O'Toole, where there was this sort of standoff between O'Toole was the president of the now defunct GPs union, the NAGP, and they were basically threatening to pull their support for Fine Gael, and they weren't going to campaign for them, they weren't going to canvass for them. They weren't being explicit about whom they were going to get behind, but they were threatening to pull this support unless government paid them, basically. And Varadkar, in his text to Matthew O'Toole, he said like words to the effect of, Sinn Féin and leftists want you on salaries, and not big ones, about 60k. Said that and then also warned. He said the Labour Party want to make GP care free for children. And he signed off by saying the words "foot" and "shoot" spring to mind. So this was Varadkar speaking to his contemporary, another doctor, another guy. And funny enough, Matthew O'Toole made a bit of a name for himself during the COVID response. He had a bit of a halo on him as well, we all have to pull together, and he was, played a blinder. Played a blinder. But you could see this was Varadkar speaking to his contemporary, and he was saying to him, like, see, if Sinn Féin get into power, you're not going to be a rich doctor anymore. And I don't know, like, for me, like, it does kind of, sometimes the types who, it's just, for me, it's kind of amazing that there's never really any kind of suggestion of the kinds of people, oftentimes, or the economic urge on the part of some people to go and study medicine in Irish colleges. But then, like, it also plays out with, you could see Varadkar and Jimmy Farrader has written about how when Varadkar was health minister, Jimmy Farrader called him a tout for private health insurance, where Varadkar, just after he had turned 36, he told reporters, I just got in and I signed up for my private health insurance there. I didn't want to be hit with that levy there. He's also, he opens, quite recently, at the start of this year, the start of last year actually, he turned the sod at a private hospital in Limerick. The Bon Secours, which also the Bon Secours, who ran what was the mother and baby home in Tuam, that was the site of a mass grave of children. But this is, he, like, on the one hand, I think sometimes there can be a tendency to read too much into things people like Varadkar say, but oftentimes I think the things that they say give an indication of what the underlying ideology that motivates political choices made by people like Varadkar. Arguably, sometimes on the left, people can just go with what Varadkar says without really kind of looking at what it all means ideologically. Now, on the other hand, people on the right tend to just go, I mean, like we had years of, do you know, like that picture of him with Trudeau and his socks?
Yes.
The two woke bays of the Western world. Do you have a favourite Varadkar photo op?
I think there was one, I don't know if it was during COVID, where he was in was he in a shoe shop? And he was trying on shoes, like, I can't remember exactly, like, yeah, I think all, like, usually, like, the best ones are the ones with the socks, like.
I'm a big
the
fan
media
of
just loved it.
I loved the one of him picking his nose at a festival.
Yeah.
On the one on Trudeau, there was, you could see when Trudeau made that state visit to Dublin, there was this, I mean, Varadkar really fawned over him. This was at a time when Trudeau really had his tail up. He was the woke bay of the Western world, and you could see that there was this inclination from Varadkar going, oh, let's just plant in Irish people's minds that I'm the Irish version of Trudeau.
And Macron as well, I think.
He had
in mind in a big way.
Yeah,
you know,
statespeople, like from, as if you'd see them on the West Wing kind of thing. But one thing that is, look, sometimes it's maybe overstated a little bit, but you know, there has been, Trudeau certainly doesn't have his tail up to the same degree as he did back when he posed with Varadkar on his socks outside government buildings. Varadkar certainly doesn't either. Arguably part of what has, in some circles, come to be referred to as an anti-woke backlash. Like, first of all, we'll get into what woke means. Do you think Varadkar is woke?
I mean, he was woke from, 2015 to 2019 when the prevailing wind was going that way.
What do you mean by when you say woke?
Well, him and Fine Gael more broadly were a lot more keen to try and let people know about what they think about their liberal credentials, right? So they would try and take credit for, say, the marriage equality referendum. They try and take credit for the repeal of the Eighth Amendment. They'd even invoke referendums from the past, like, say, the divorce referendum, and they'd say, like, all of this social progress, Fine Gael is responsible for it, and we are, you know, we're woke kings, and it's a way of obscuring class relations, isn't it, and kind of giving the ruling class a veneer of legitimacy, so people go, oh, isn't it brilliant that, like, we have a female CEO or something like that, you know, and it's kind of, doesn't look at, say, I don't know, the CEO is paying the people at the bottom the minimum wage and they're below the poverty line.
What do you think is the wokest thing Varadkar has ever done?
God, I don't know. I like.
Do you think he's woke? And we will get to what is woke, and also whether there has been. I mean, you know, people on the right and far right call him a communist.
Yeah, but like, I think this is the problem, like, where a lot of these words, like, just have lost any sort of meaning. Like, I mean, you've people applying, like, any sort of kind of, you know, even minor change in anything is, you know, you've people saying it's woke, but like, without kind of setting out, like, what exactly does that mean? You know, is it virtue signaling? What is it, like?
Yeah. And what is it to you, though?
I mean, I like, to me, like, I think, you know, an example of woke, I think a legitimate example of woke would be like Adon O'Riordan going down to Mount Street and like being photographed, you know, doing a bit of tidying up, like with the tents on Mount Street, when, you know, his party and himself, like, were responsible for some of the most, like, damaging policies, social policies in, you know, the past couple of decades, like when Labour were in government with Fine Gael. that sort of stuff, like, but like maybe that's more kind of virtue signaling. But I think the two things have kind of been mangled together. And I think like the problem is that, you know, people see through that sort of stuff, but then when people come along and try to kind of propose genuinely like progressive measures that will materially benefit, you know, poorer people or more vulnerable people in society, it's all thrown in together. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's all woke, you know, so you have the lines kind of blurred now between, you know, virtue signaling and being woke, and it's hard to kind of know what's what anymore, you know.
I think, like, as I understand it, it's a kind of it's an approach to politics that makes a virtue of kind of performative and symbolic gestures of inclusion and solidarity in order to obscure class relations. That's generally how it's used by the political class. But then, if you're, say, someone from the right, it's just kind of anyone who's calling for access to basic resources is woke, you know, and intransigent and unreasonable, and needs to just learn the value of a hard day's work. So that's that. I think you're right. Like, it's a nebulous term, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, which is why it's so perfect, because you can invoke it and everyone has their own definition.
I actually hate the term. I hate the term because, well, first of all, it doesn't mean anything, because, you know, when something comes to mean everything, well, then it means nothing as well. Yeah. And like, I'm almost kind of like outing myself, like, where I'll say that, like, my main gripe with the word and how it's applied and how it's used is that I actually do think that it's rank what has become of the word, where, you know, it used to be a very simple but quite powerful term that African Americans used to get across the fact that they were woke to the injustices that were perpetrated against them during the fight for civil rights in the US. Then at some point there was that American actor, wasn't it, who became known as the woke bae. It was some guy like 10 years ago or so ago on Twitter who would come on Twitter and say stuff like, it's really good to be a man and a feminist, like, and just like the most like the most platitudinous bullshit, like, you know, or kind of go like, you know, I respect women, like, and we'll go like, wow, you
consent
are
is very important.
Yeah. Like, you are class, fair play to you. And like, I think it was ever so briefly. I mean, like right now, I don't know anyone, like, either in person or, you know, anyone anywhere who uses the term sincerely and earnestly to say, oh yeah, I'm woke, by the way.
Didn't Theresa May say she was woke and proud at one point?
Did she actually?
A few years ago. But other than her, I'm not aware of anyone. It just comes from the right as a way of, you know, having a go at people who are under 35 and are upset that they're never going to own a fucking house.
Yeah. in introducing, like, you know, fucking free Tampax to universities is woke.
But that's also
to the no. But I'm saying, like, no. But I'm saying like to these people that you see, like, commenting on this stuff, like, there, you know, there'll be people saying like that's just woke.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? When it's not, like, but yeah, but it's just kind of like, you know, it's just it's applied to everything. Like, it's not just even the word woke. Like, I've seen people saying that Leo Varadkar is a Marxist.
Yeah.
Like, you know, because there might be some, like, vaguely kind of progressive
He's a Marxist
measure, and it'd be like
some Leo Varadkar is a communist. Like, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, he was actually asked specifically. You know, it's funny how these things go, where, you know, the word woke has been, Ireland's always a few years behind on all this kind of stuff, where you have, it's a whole big dumb debate, really, like, where you have Sharon Keogan, the senator, and Willie O'D, in the aftermath of the two defeated referenda, have both said, like, Willie O'D said something like, Fianna Fáil have to stop playing to the woke gallery. Now, this is a guy, Willie O'D, back when the gender recognition act was being passed. This is like, you know, Willie O'D, what is he, in his 70s now? Like, you know, man from Limerick, like, he got up in the Dáil and he said, this Gender Recognition Act that will afford a protection and bestow basic human rights on trans people in Ireland. He said, this is a good thing, but it doesn't go far enough. And like,
that sounds pretty woke.
yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, by the standards how we now talk about these things, like, yeah, Willie O'D was quote unquote woke back in 2015. I think Eamon O'Keefe said similar about the Gender Recognition Act as well while it was going through the Dáil. Whereas, and certainly, I'm not sure if Leo Varadkar has ever said that he's woke, but now, unbelievably crass more than anything. Philip Ryan, who was over on that trip to the US for St. Patrick's Day, wrote a piece, the headline of which was, you know, I'm not woke, Varadkar. I mean, you see the way it's written, like, Philip Ryan asks Varadkar, oh, are you woke? And he says, no, I don't think I'm woke. And then it goes on to say...
What kind of a fucking question is that?
Yeah. But then the most awkward fucking segue of all time, then, where he then segues into something about Gaza, where he goes like, so are you woke, Mr. Varadkar? And he's like, no, I'm not woke. What about this genocide? Which it was kind of a neat little kind of vignette of the kind of pointlessness and the just how all of this stuff is really just aesthetic bullshit, like whether someone's woke or not when compared with a material issue like Israel and Gaza right now, you know. But this is, you know, there was something in the Irish Times then about, it was Joe Humphreys, he was putting the question to Senator Sharon Keogan and Willie O'D, kind of asking them just what is woke? Like, what do you mean when you say woke? Which is, I don't know. I think we all know what they mean.
Who taught Sharon Keogan the term terminally online?
Oh, yeah.
Who was working for her and has a Twitter account and told her that? Because someone told it to her, and she said it in the. It's in the Dáil record now, the term. I'm sick of these terminally online woke mob people.
But like, one of the things that people will routinely say is woke will be like the hate speech bill. Sharon Keogan, a big opponent of it. She's spoken about it at length in the Shannon. She's made it an important part of her political brand and identity that, you know, she is for free speech. She's, as I said, a vocal opponent of this free speech bill, but she's a good example as well where, again, quite recently, about half a year or so ago, she stood up in the Shannon and she made an intervention about Juno Dawson's book, This Is Gay, it's called.
Oh, yeah.
So, which was, it was placed on a school curricula, and it was in school libraries and obviously accessible to students, and it had been placed on these curricula by people who work in education who, I mean, like, I would say, you kind of looked at things and went, it's probably better that kids learn about sex from books rather than in the schoolyard, kind of thing, you know. This predictably then, the book itself caused this massive backlash. People, those fucking idiots who they were going around Ireland in that wee boat of theirs and showing up in like rural towns and going into libraries and like just harassing librarians, going like, do you have this gay book in here, like, you know. But like,
sorry, was the book literally called "This Is Gay"? I can just imagine the reaction, like when they saw, like the book is called "This Is Gay."
This is gay.
That's all fine. Like, isn't it amazing how that was never framed as an attack on democracy the way some other actions by these people were? Because, I mean, surely in order for democracy to function, you need to have an educated and an informed citizenry, and having access to library services is an important part of that, right? That was never framed as an attack on democracy. That only happened when was it Michael Healy-Rae was walking outside of the
He was
Dáil,
called a
and
piece of shit.
and people who he'd been kind of pandering to a bit,
Yeah.
you know, with comments that he'd made about was it transgender people and that kind of thing. Gave him a few shoves, and then all of a sudden it was, this is an attack on democracy. This is an attack on, you know, free speech or
I think
whatever.
it started with Anne Rabbitte when someone threw a sealed bag of cow shit.
Media got on board with that one.
They did, yeah. That was like that our very democracy was under threat when that happened.
And it was it's mute if someone shows up at a left-wing TD's house or a left-wing politician's house. There's very, very little said about it at all because
what about Joan Burton and Job saying, like, you know, face it, not guilty. But like with Sharon Keogan, like she has got up in the Dáil in the Seanad. She's got up in the Seanad and she has spoken about this book, This Is Gay. And not only has she, look, it's one thing going into libraries and hassling librarians and harassing people trying to access books. That's one thing. What Sharon Keogan did in the Seanad was she got up and she specifically said she wanted to find out who put this book on the junior cycle curriculum. And she wanted this person to face consequences. Like, she wanted this person to lose their job, you know? So if you're an absolute free speech absolutist, which, you know, there likely isn't really a thing. There's, you know, this occurs on a spectrum, you know? Yeah. I'm kind of a little bit, as far as people go on the left, I actually would be quite, you know, in a very narrow sense, I like to think I am actually quite, you know, quite an absolutist, as far maybe a little bit of an outlier on the left, but in the narrow sense that I don't think that people should be persecuted or penalized by the state for things they say or think. And here you have Sharon Keogan, who is supposedly, she's an icon for these, you know, the anti-woke free speech brigade. She's getting up in the Seanad and she's calling for the state to sanction someone who works in education because they placed this book on a junior cycle curriculum. Now I know that now people will just say that I'm a groomer for defending this book.
Did she just get up in the Senate in the Seanad and say, like, hold the book up and say, this is gay?
But that's all free speech is to these people. It's just like the ability to say bigoted shit on the internet and not lose your Twitter account over it. It comes down to that, like, you know.
Yeah. Generally, like, unprincipled people.
Well, there'd be nothing about, say...
Well, we're all hypocrites in our own way, like, but it's like, it's funny when you make it such a central part of your brand that you can't do the basics of, all right, let's not call for the state to come down hard on people who, in this instance, have, you know, contributed to the devising of a curriculum for junior cycle students.
Yeah, and very, very few of them, you know, had much to say when, say, Micheál Martin said what he said about the ditch.
You can say what you want about people like the ditch,
you know,
because the ditch is woke.
Yeah, the ditch is. Well, it's funny. I like. There certainly are people who would call us woke. Like, there are those who would argue, like, you know, and the fact that.
Every now and then, like we've talked about this before, though, like you'll have like a string of stories and it'll get a bit of traction, and then we'll publish a comment piece and there'll be these guys who are like, what the fuck?
The ditch is woke. Like, yeah, sorry guys, like, hate to break it to you, but yeah. On all this as well, related to Varadkar's resignation, related to woke, anti-woke, related to public debate and poor Anne Rabbitte, who you just invoked. Kieran Cannon, Galway East TD, who we mentioned earlier, one of the Fine Gael TDs he's done, he's out. Pouring one out for Kieran Cannon. He's not running in the next general election.
I believe he did the state some service.
Oh yeah. Lots of people are actually saying that, like, you know. I've seen a lot of, he was, whether you agreed or not with his politics, he was a
politician.
He was a politician.
He was elected.
Nobody can deny that Kieran Cannon was a politician. Nobody can deny that. But he, and this is the part of his, you know, threw up a statement on Twitter, you know, and quite near the top of this statement, he said, it's that word nobody likes to see, toxicity in politics. He said it's certainly a factor, the increased toxicity that he's seen in political life is one of the reasons why he stepped down. And he referred back to, he said 20 years ago. It's like, all right, yeah. What was going on 20 years ago? Like he said things were much better for politicians 20 years ago. 2004, when we were in the middle of the Celtic Tiger, and you had...
I think things were much better for everyone 20 years ago.
People weren't complaining back when the Celtic Tiger was going on. Like, now they don't seem to like me anymore, How toxic do you think the ditch is? No, like how toxic do you think political life is?
Well, like, I don't know, like if you'd say, like, look at, say, the last couple of weeks, the government got its arse handed to it in 2 referendums after they deliberately tried to mislead the electorate as to what the...
Two woke referendums
as to what the legal impact of passing them would be. After that, they flew to Washington, where they pledged allegiance to American imperialism, paid some lip service to what was happening to people in Palestine.
By the way, to jump in real quick, that's the one nice thing I would say about Varadkar, is like, in as much as these speeches mean anything, his speech was actually like really good. But
it's rhetoric, and you're there breaking bread with the guy who is arming a campaign of genocidal violence. The eve before St. Patrick's Day, people came in and fucking scooped up 200 international protection applicants and dumped them down in County Wicklow because they were afraid that it would be embarrassing if tourists saw them. So, like, who is being toxic here, right? Politicians have had a significant contribution to the atmosphere. I think the housing crisis as well has a big part to do with it. It's like the social fabric, like the web of connections that actually makes people into communities, right? And is starting to erode. And until recently enough, politicians have been insulated by it. But now things are getting so bad, and these people are becoming so brazen, in part actually because the state refuses to clamp down on the far right, that it's beginning to impact politicians. And now they're saying, oh, this is too toxic. But like, a lot of the atmosphere and a lot of what's happening is a direct result of political choices.
How toxic was the ditch to Niall Collins? Because Niall Collins is one of the guys. Niall Collins, Junior Minister from Limerick. We did a series of stories about him around this time last year. About big ones were about his role in the sale of public land to his wife. Niall Collins, after Kieran Cannon's statement, and the thing is, whenever a politician comes out and says things are toxic for politicians love this shit. So like, you had a cavalcade of politicians going, oh yeah, it's toxic for me too, and then media love it as well, because a lot of the mainstream press kind of get up on their high horses as well about, oh, it's toxic to be a journalist, like, but now
fine people who won't become journalists or politicians now, they're being frightened away.
Yeah. But Niall Collins was one of these. He came out and he said it's toxic for politicians. How toxic were we to Niall Collins? You're a pretty toxic guy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I think
bad vibes.
Kind of, I'd go back a little bit and say like that, you basically have a situation where politicians routinely like to take credit for good things that happen. And to a certain degree, like, the media has insulated them from having to do the opposite, which is take a bit of flack for things when they don't go wrong. And that basically you have this situation where any sort of like criticism, like today, for example, and I know, like, they're not talking about necessarily other politicians usually. It's usually about people on Twitter or whatever. But like Holly Cairns said today, like, we need a general election. In response to Varadkar resigning. And there was people replying, like, saying that was toxic.
That's the most toxic thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
It was like, it was fucking insane. Like, people were saying, It's no wonder people don't want to get into politics when Holly Cairns is calling for a general election.
I thought Holly Cairns was woke, but you're telling me that she's toxic now. She's rebranded as toxic.
Toxic and woke. Like it's just mad. Like where, you know, like what exactly do you expect? Like when you get into politics, like people are going to have a go at you. Do you know what I mean? Like there's people who work, you know, in jobs that are paid a fifth of what TDs get, and would get like similar abuse, you know, on a daily basis, like from people. Do you know what I mean? Like bus drivers would get more abuse, I would say, than politicians on a daily basis. Like it's ridiculous, like pandering to this sort of like idea that politicians should just be allowed to take credit for all the good things and nobody should be allowed to challenge them about, you know, the fucking toxic things that they're doing to
what
society.
What do you think is going to happen though? Like you oversee the country deteriorating for say what, at least the last 15 years in terms of public services, in terms of, you know, opportunities for people, in terms of levels of inequality, child homelessness, and the entire time you tell people that actually everything is fucking class. Look at my graph. This is amazing. The economy is doing class, and yeah, people are really angry and really upset. And you know, if you preside over things getting as bad as they have, then unfortunately it's to be expected that certain norms and conventions about how you treat elected officials are going to start to deteriorate as well.
That is a really toxic thing to say. I'm really disappointed.
I just think like you can't have your cake and eat it. Like you can't fucking say, you know, Fine Gael is doing this. Like we've, you know, introduced this policy and isn't this fucking great? And, you know, then the media saying, oh, well, like, you know, to be fair to the minister, like this is very progressive and blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, when they do something that's fucking shit, you know, where you have people basically saying that, you know, you have to separate the minister from the policy. Do you know what I mean? When it's something bad, like, you know, they're human at the end of the day, and like we can't, you know, this is just a decision that they've taken. You know, we shouldn't focus on the person. It's just a decision.
Yeah, like it's not like the same as people go like, oh, that you can, like Manchester by the Sea, you can still think it's a great film even though Casey Affleck's in it. It's not the fucking same thing. But that's how people tend to speak about these kind of things. Like, let's separate the art from the artist. We are just at the point of the show, everyone's favourite, Big Paulie Doyle's Take of the Week, brought to you in collaboration with Board and Mona, because when you're Irish, you like an old peat fire or some shite like that. Paulie, what's the crack? What's your Take of the Week?
The Take of the Week wasn't actually written by an individual this time. It's actually a newspaper's take. It's the take of the Business Post.
Business Post?
Was it written by AI?
Yes.
So it's an Irish Times. Are you sure it's not an Irish Times article?
It's the Business Post view about the housing crisis, and it is that the removal of rent caps is the secret to unlocking the delivery of 50,000 homes. When this current government feels like it is beginning to make progress on housing, worrying news emerges to show it is nowhere near enough. That doesn't really make sense, but that's also the view. Okay, so what do we think of this? Are rent caps a direct obstacle to solving the housing crisis? Are things not interesting enough for landlords, or financially that is? Do they need even more of your income? What do you think?
It's the same, like, happens across the world. You know, most recently, California Proposition 10, which was ultimately defeated. This was a referendum in California that would have extended rent caps across the state, basically. And this referendum campaign was a subject of like people like the Collisons were pumping the No campaign full of cash, and other kind of people in that, you know, those guys, the EAC tech bros kind of guys.
Oh yeah,
those kind of guys pumping it full of cash. You've also seen, I think I'm right in saying Paul Krugman, you know, superstar economist, writes with the New York Times. He's also he's an anti-rent caps kind of guy, and the argument is always the same, that if you introduce rent caps, well then landlords will leave the market, or landlords won't be incentivized to provide provide housing. It's this kind of, I don't know. To me, it's just it's accommodation. Well, states and local authorities and populations allowing themselves to be held hostage by landlords, to not just say, yeah, fuck it, we're going to introduce rent caps. We're going to like it.
One of the things, the rent cap introduced in 2021 for understandable reasons has been a disaster for attracting foreign capital to buy new homes. It's an so is this taking it for granted that institutional investors, which have had a huge hand in actually, exacerbating the housing crisis, are actually a force for good because they increase supply, even though no one can fucking afford to live in the houses?
Well, that's like Fine Gael's ideology. That's the government's ideology. Like that article reflects what the government wants.
They are holding truths to. They're speaking truth to power.
Guys, thanks so much for joining us for episode 2 of our podcast with Red Wolf. We want to sincerely apologise to Lucinda Creighton. We ran out of time. Hopefully we'll have her on next week. Stick with us for what's going to be a lovely series here with Red Wolf and the Dets. Thanks so much.